See they know the truth and
Please consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.
Out of the stormy past, till we now stand at last. Where? Chapter 13. The Black World at the Crossroads. One of the most troublesome facts in the study of history over very long periods of time, such as several centuries, is that a truth may slowly emerge, period after period, until it clearly forms itself into a truth impregnable, a fact nowhere explicitly stated as such in the mass of data covered. As one continues to move on down through the centuries, countless events and situations may continue to make supporting additions to what has already been established as an unassailable fact. Yet that truth may be so repugnant, so utterly void of any rational or intelligent reason for its existence, that hardly any historian would wish to state it in his work. Yet I did just that when I wrote that the whites are the implacable foe, the traditional and everlasting enemy of the blacks. The compelling reason for publicly putting this declaration in its historical context is made clear. The necessary re-education of blacks and a possible solution of racial crises can begin, strangely enough, only when blacks fully realize this central fact in their lives. The white man is their bitter enemy. For this is not the ranting of a wild-eyed militancy, but the calm and unmistakable verdict of several thousand years of documented history. Even the sample case study of 10 black states in this work shows that each and every one of those states were destroyed by whites. Facing this reality does not call for increasing hatred or screaming and utterly futile denunciations. Far from it. For all these shouting, emotional outbursts by blacks are in themselves indications of weakness, because they becloud the mind and prevent the calm and clear thinking that is absolutely required for planning if the race is to be saved from final destruction. Destruction is not too strong a term here. Only fools will be unable to see that the race is again being hemmed in, surrounded by its enemies, and cannot survive forever under what might be called a state of gradual siege. Those Negroes who are still pleading with the whites for brotherhood through integration are so deaf and blind that they are unable to get the white enemy's reply to these frantic pleas for acceptance through integration. The reply of whites was so loud and clear that it was heard around the world. When segregation in schools and residencies was outlawed throughout the United States, whites fled from the cities to the suburbs just as though a plague had struck or some deadly disease was spreading. The blacks were left alone in the cities, now called ghettos or the inner city. This was rejection, total, complete. The black youth of America got this message from whites first, and they got it quickly. They formed new battle lines. Several millions of middle-class Negroes and their leaders have not received the message yet, and probably never will. For them, the white man is the ship, and all else is the sea. They themselves do not feel competent to develop the highest standards of life in the all-black communities created by the very whites they so much worship. For them, there can be no quality education unless, by hook or crook, some white faces, any kind of white faces, are in the classrooms. Their main drive is to force the fleeing whites to accept them, or, please, oh you superior people, allow us to bus some of our children to your schools. They achieve these hollow victories on the integration front. They add a new cry. Give us racial balance. These Negroes have neither the ethnic pride nor the self-respect that is so characteristic of American Indians, Japanese, and Chinese, and they seem utterly insensitive to being openly rejected by the whites and battle on with the fantastic idea that they can force the whites to accept them socially. One major reason why young black America understood the white position so quickly was that by some happy circumstance in history they were more closely attuned to the great common people and therefore shared their common aspirations and common sense. No one has to tell them that there can be no bigger farce than the integration of hated and oppressed blacks with the very white enemies who oppress them. Both the farce of integration and the everlasting white enemy are regularly highlighted in the world's press. Race riots in integrated U.S. armies in Europe, and even at war in Indochina, race riots in camps in USA, race riots on the battleships of the integrated U.S. Navy, and in short, open combat between blacks and whites when they are forced together as equals. There is peace and harmony, of course, when the blacks humbly stay in their place, their subordinate place. Using the courts to force whites to accept blacks as equals is quite futile even when and if all the thousands of court battles are won. White America is overwhelmingly against integration, and white Americans are no different than other whites throughout the world. The only instance in their history when integration was welcomed was when the outcome would put them in a more dominating position, or one of personal security, money, and a prestige they could never otherwise achieve. Hence, because of the high premium many Negroes give to a white skin, the most ordinary whites will eagerly marry any black star or any other blacks if they have money. But in no period in history, and this point is important, have the masses of blacks sought integration and general amalgamation with the whites. During all of their travails, their pride in race was steadfast. The so-called self-hatred actually reflects a sense of futility and despair over lack of leadership and unity for action. They, the black masses, rejected general integration as a movement to obliterate the black race as such. The black masses still reject it. I have pointed out blind alleys into which we are being led by leaders whose aims and objectives are quite personal and not those of the black masses. The black masses should demand absolute equality on all fronts. Precisely the same rights, privileges, and responsibilities as all other citizens, and without any exceptions whatsoever. This obviously includes the right of every individual to attend the school or college of his choice, rent or buy a home wherever he pleases, marry whom he pleases, white or black, and to freely use all places of public accommodation, all of which is a far, far cry from the doctrine that all this must necessarily include a white presence to be valid, or a mass movement by the race toward amalgamation. The presence of whites in any given situation should be incidental, if considered at all. What the Negroes referred to above seem incapable of grasping is the difference between a good school and a white school, a good community in which to live and a white community. To them, they are necessarily the same, continuing evidence of the Caucasian success in capturing the minds of blacks. The motherland at the crossroads. The problem is essentially the same in our African homeland. There, too, white is still the standard of excellence, of what is right, wise, and best. I personally know a number of African presidents and ministers who will not dare to make important decisions without the guidance of white advisors, men who often know far less about the questions at hand than the presidents and their ministries. But they all feel the need for a white seal of approval. The blacks, therefore, still have a long way to go in order to achieve absolute equality as free men among free men. They have a long way to go in the United States and numerous other areas in which they live all over the world. In Africa, as of this writing, Tanzania leads in the first hard-headed, masses-oriented socio-economic program that is expressly designed to raise the level of life of the whole people, beginning with those lowest down. It is a truly African program, drawing heavily on the African cultural traditions. It was, from its very inception, too much for those of the elite who think of independence as a mere transfer of power from a white ruling class to a black ruling upper class, leaving the masses no better off than they had been under colonialism. These are the kind of smug and cocksure leaders who are preparing the ground not for military coups, but mass uprisings such as Africa has not yet witnessed. The first line of action should center around the study and development of nationwide, people-involved, self-help cooperative programs, village by village, town by town, and block by block. Each community would do its own development planning, the government's principal role being to provide advisors, training, technical assistance, and loans when and where these are needed. For people with little or no money, barter and exchange are the first steps towards economic salvation, the basis for capital formation. Increased food production should be seen as for both wealth and health. The main emphasis would be inter-community relations between the various language groups in all development programs. This means agreement plans for each area to specialize in producing goods needed but not produced in the other regions. This is the direct route to national unity through cooperation in order to reach the goals desired in common by all language groups in each African state. This calls for thinking, planning, and hard work. Now, it is just here, within the race, where integration is not only needed, but it is mandatory. We shall remain a weak people until we begin the drive for integration of blacks first of all, instead of battling to integrate with other peoples. The second great task of government leadership calls for furthering the home front economic development by aggressively working for African economic unity on a scale never before attempted. Interstate trade and other economic programs designed to deal with Asia and Europe must begin with unity of action in Africa itself, region by region, and then interregional or continental efforts, if Black Africa is ever to free itself from the present economic morass. Nor will we be able to cover our failures by endlessly sweating and fuming over South Africa and Rhodesia. Black Africa can never deal effectively with white-ruled areas until it deals with Black Africa itself first. The foundation for everything we do or wish to do is economic, a word that simply means wealth enough to be really independent and having the means to do what must be done. If we have not noticed that every one of the great black nations studied rose as the result of a variety of wealth-producing activities which enabled them to achieve set goals, if we missed this fact, then we missed the most important lesson they left us in this book. Another significant fact was the widespread trade between the early African states. Somehow, they overrode the communications barriers about which we now hear so much. The crying first need throughout the African world, however, is dedicated leaders, not just office-holding bureaucrats, men and women leaders who will be more and more in the field among the people and less preoccupied in offices with paperwork. These will be the people on a mission to improve the lives of the people rather than enriching themselves. Meanwhile, a frustrated people send up a silent prayer, often heavy with tears. Please, O God, send us a few real leaders, just a few, Lord. Wanted: leaders and African ideologies. The black people of the world have, therefore, come at last to destiny's crossroads. They must make some fundamental decisions as a single people. The one hopeful sign is that they are slowly and painfully coming to their hitherto beclouded senses, coming to realize that they are one people with a common destiny, and that, no matter how scattered over the world, the treatment suffered by one black group is suffered by all. But there is a terrible crisis of leadership at the crossroads. There is no united leadership group or any real effort to create one. The great difficulty is that black leaders, again, unlike the Jews, do not know what their own heritage is. They are almost wholly ignorant of their own cultural source from which independent, original thinking springs and progress is inspired. The Negro leaders who spearhead and carry on the campaigns for integration, amalgamation being the aim, not only do not know the great heritage of the blacks, they do not want to know it. They wish to draw on the Caucasian heritage and become identified with it. They are totally rejected by the whites, but no matter, they keep on trying, because the white liberals do encourage them to hope by mixing with them from time to time. Other leaders, equally ignorant of their heritage, simply do not know which way to lead. They, too, feel compelled to adopt and follow Caucasian ideologies because they do not feel free, equal, and competent enough to develop an ideology of their own, an African-oriented ideology. Hence, many, including some black youth leaders from whom so much was expected, are jumping out of white capitalistic democracy's frying pan, straight into white communism's fire. Neither system was designed for the black world, yet each is only too anxious to use the blacks as they have always been used, a numerical power base for white rule. Moreover, the capitalistic version of democracy and the Soviet version of communism not only could not serve the interests and aspirations of the blacks, but they do not serve the interest of the white masses, neither of them. Of course, there would be a much larger class and a more powerful class of black commissars and black central committees if communism should spread over the black world, and more black capitalists if capitalism becomes the prevailing way of life. In each case, we have not a theory or speculation, but a plain operating fact that even a fool could see. Both capitalism and communism have ruling classes that suppress and exploit the people. The masses of the people, like so many masses of puppets, are fed and filled with the ideals and principles of both systems. For these they fight and die, screaming these ideals as though they were drugged. Voting creates an illusion of power that does not exist in fact. It works wonderfully well for the rulers, the real decision makers, because the people in capitalistic democracies actually believe they are deciding and running things. One surprising difference between capitalistic and communist countries is that the people in the latter countries know they are powerless. When the United States assumed the leadership role of holding the line of Western power throughout the world, Russia took over a similar role for the white East European states. The hammer and sickle flag is different than the stars and stripes, but each now represents the same objective. Communism seeks to bring the various peoples of the world under the white supremacy of white communist states under Russian domination. Our capitalistic democracy aims at doing the same thing, white rule under American domination. Hence, the Cold War, which has nothing to do with communism itself. The so-called Cold War, in fact, is a contest between two of the strongest white powers for world domination. Because communism is not the real issue, as capitalism is not the real issue on the communist side, the United States will form alliances and give all-out aid and support to a communist country just as quickly, some say more quickly, as to a non-communist country. Anything to weaken, not communism, but Russia, the chief white challenge for world rule. As between these two giants, the choice of the blacks can only be a choice between two groups of white masters, although the yoke and shackles of one are attractively painted red. Nor will the blacks find their salvation in Mao's China or any third world in which they will still be in a subordinate position. To be equal, they must first stand on their own feet. In this capitalism versus communism connection, the immediate trouble confronting the blacks is that so many millions of them have been made so wholly dependent on the white race for so many generations that they have become mentally lazy. For these, dependence has become comfortable. It frees them from the initiative, responsibility, and planning required of independent free men and women. Leave it to the white folks has become their unspoken creed. They have not yet come to realize that this attitude of dependence by so many is responsible for the whole race being characterized as children and men being called boys. To be recognized as men, they seem not to know they must aggressively assume the real role of men. And this is why so many black leaders expect the solution to the so-called race problem to be handed to them on the silver platters of white ideologies. This excuses them from both the mental tasks of working out their own and the labor required for actually carrying through a united action program, first nationwide and then worldwide. It is needless to say what elementary common sense dictates, which is that when the African people achieve enough unity to develop the ideological guidelines for their own advancement, they will draw what is best for them from any or all existing systems in a simple matter of course. For whatever an African organized way of life might be, they would not hesitate any more than Stalin and the Soviet leaders when they brought in capitalists from the United States, Germany, and England, not to adopt capitalism, but to learn those capitalistic skills, techniques, and methods which would be useful in building a great Soviet Union. The emerging communist states drew heavily on capitalism when it served their purpose, openly and without apology. Hence, they became equal with the greatest powers without changing their own ideology. These observations are addressed only to those who seem not to know that one may extract what he needs from capitalism and communism without becoming capitalist or communist. The Black Unity Threat. None seems to have noticed or understood the signals from the white world, signals which tell how tremendously important the whites regard any movement toward unity among the blacks. Nothing racial seems to upset them more. That is why they insist on being in on any black organizational movement either as financially supporting members or as advisors, observers, or reporters. To bar them from any exclusively all-black conference is regarded as something a little less than treason, or as some kind of black conspiracy in the making. On the other hand, no blacks are ever present at all-white conferences where the fate of blacks everywhere is discussed and decided. Unity among the blacks has been prevented for so many centuries that the various mechanisms to keep blacks disorganized have been perfected in the Western system of race control. The white man is keenly aware of the tremendous power of any well-organized group. But an organization of blacks on a scope that would represent the voice of Black America would be a threat and a challenge not only to continued white domination of blacks in the United States, but also foreign policies and practices that affect the lives of African people elsewhere over the world. But the apprehension of whites about the possibility of real black unity appears to be quite as needless now as in the past. For we are still in the meeting and talking stage of our history, and appear to not be ready even to begin the attack on the obviously built-in obstacles. These have been pointed out over and over again in this study. They had to be emphasized and could not possibly be overemphasized because, in addition to the historic reasons for our own self-generated disunity, no other non-white people on Earth are in the dangerous situation of having so many of their leaders selected, appointed, sponsored, or financed by the white ruling classes. In the case of blacks in the United States, and the same is true of blacks everywhere, these Negro heads of important institutions and organizations represent the white man's indirect rule over the black community. It is the voice of these leaders that is accepted as the voice of the race. They do indeed have a great following, drawn almost entirely from the traditional Negro elite or upper middle class, lawyers, government officials, doctors, professors, school administrators, scientists, engineers, heads of integrationist organizations, etc. They are essentially anti-black, anti-African, and therefore anti-black studies. Hence their frantic drive for integration, which, of course, will effectively check the alarming development of pride in race, a sense of cultural unity with one's own bloodline, and a growing knowledge of being members of a race with a record of achievements unsurpassed by any other people, despite the conversion of so much that was black to white. This the Negro leadership would destroy even at its inception by forcing the black youth of America more directly under white education direction and control. A vengeful striking back at black youth for starting revolt against their mental enslavement in the first place. In a panel discussion with 3 other university presidents, the head of one major white university said, "Integration is a very misleading term. Our black students are as separate from the white students as they are in the general society, and they know it. They come because of the vast number of special scholarships offered to them. This is a wise program from our point of view. It brings more of the future black leaders into a more traditionally American environment. We are not disturbed by their demand for black studies, for these, of course, will be gradually phased out as their emotions cool." That same month, May 1971, a Negro professor declared, "Black studies are ridiculous in any university. I am not black and I will not join in this new hypocrisy. I am a Negro, yet outside the United States I am considered white." On a recent TV program, the head of a militant black movement went even farther. In response to a question, he said, "Look at me. I am neither black, Negro, nor African. I am a Moor. My roots are in Asia." He was born in Mississippi. "But," the moderator pressed, "you call your movement a black movement." "Ah," the great Moorish leader replied, "that's strategy," apparently satisfied that the black masses did not hear him or, if they did, would not understand. Quite relevant to all this, I have made several points above. One was that, notwithstanding the white man's well-developed system of maintaining disunity within the African race, he is still disturbed by any signs of a movement toward unity among blacks, and goes into action in many subtle ways to offset it. The important point is the most disheartening. This is the fact that the white man really has nothing to fear from any effective unity among blacks for a long, long time, because he himself installs and backs most of the key leaders of the race, 2 of which I have just quoted above, and the number is legion. We still have, in the 1970s, therefore, exactly the same unique problem that confronted Africans in Egypt over 6,000 years ago. And we challenge any student of history to point out any other people who are, or have been saddled with, a perpetually disunifying and progress-checking problem of this magnitude. For while the white man has mingled his blood with non-white peoples from times immemorial, in no other people was the outcome a hostile race within a race. No other non-white people with Caucasian blood, whether Indian, Japanese, or Chinese, feel any compelling reason for integration, a code word for amalgamation, with the whites. Quite the contrary, they resist it as a policy or an acceptable general practice. The only hope for the kind of racial unity that will really liberate the blacks in America and command the respect of the world will be a new kind of mass organization on a scale with an action program never before attempted. This will require a new kind of leadership, a leadership with the single purpose of helping the masses up toward a better life. We are noted for our countless organizations, large and small. Each is an independent kingdom, struggling to become an empire under a great chief. This is inevitable in the circumstances. But as in the history of Africa, not one of these, standing alone, can meet the mounting crisis of the race. If they will not unite, the race need not continue in despair because of the undying pride of individual leaders. A people's mass organization movement can override all obstacles, but will this be done? The subtitle of this book, Great Issues of a Race from 4500 BC to 2000 AD, has puzzled some readers. 2000 AD? That is the end of this century, and we're not there yet. This subtitle, however, not only reflects the author's conviction that the main obstacles which confronted us in the past and are with us today will still be with us in the year 2000 and after, but also that for the rest of this century, it is very likely that the blacks will still be meeting, listening to, and applauding fiery, soul-stirring speeches, protesting and denouncing injustices, or happily relying on politics as the ultimate solution of our problems. The frustrations, confusion of goals, and a sense of helplessness are likely to continue into the next century. What black youth began as the foundation for a new and mighty advance may be, and indeed is being defeated. But whether the task of what must be done is undertaken by this generation or left to the next, one thing is certain. It can never be said that the black race does not know exactly what to do, or that not a single member of the race ever carefully studied and then presented a comprehensive plan as one way out. For the final pages of this work offer such a plan. It is not the plan, but a plan, a comprehensive basis for beginning and improving, but beginning.
Please consider supporting us by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons. Your support will be greatly appreciated.